Welcome back. This is the second lecture for week 4. What we're going to do is we're continuing on and we're going to take a closer look at the first National Energy Act of 1978, because this is really where the whole idea of doing an energy audit, a lot of the places where money is received to do energy audits, that's where it all started. So the first National Energy Act of 1978, it actually included the following sub-acts. There were 5 in total. The first one, fondly known now as NECPA, or NECPA, stood for the National Energy Conservation Policy Act. Then we had the PPI-FUA, which stood for Power Plant and Industrial Fuel Use Act. PURPA, PURPA, for the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act, the NGPA, or the National Gas Policy Act, and the ETA, the Energy Tax Act. So, first of all, NECPA. If we look at NECPA, some of the major provisions under it, we had Utility Conservation Program for Resident. So there were a lot of rebates, tax incentives to go out and add insulation, basically make building tighter. And this was at a residential level. It included also weatherization grants for low-income families. There was an energy conservation loan program. There was a grant program that came out for schools and hospitals. And then number 5, take a close look at number 5, energy audits for public buildings. If you go in and look under that section under NECPA, that's where those 3 terms were originally coined that I talked about earlier. The idea that you could have a walkthrough audit, a mini audit, or a technical assist audit. Number 6, the appliance efficiency standard. We know that fondly nowadays is the Energy Star rating for appliances. And then number 7, civil penalties related to automobile fuel efficiency. That's sort of comical because that comes and goes, over the years. The PPI-FUA, love number 1, prohibition of new oil and gas-fired boilers. Now, I don't know what they were expecting to do, but there it was. Restrictions on existing coal-capable large boilers. Restrictions on users of natural gas for boiler fuel. There was also a pollution control loan program, and there was a supplemental authority given to the federal government to actually step in and control these things. PURPA, they looked at rate design standards, in other words, standardization of how things are billed. We talked about that a little bit when we were looking at electrical bills between bundled and unbundled bills. So the government came in and tried to standardize rates. Consideration of rate design standards. Retail policies for natural gas activities. So they were also looking at deregulating natural gas. They were also looking at cogeneration at that point, trying to make cogeneration more palatable. There were wholesale provisions. There was aid given to states and consumer representation. There was also money available for small hydroelectric facilities. And there was expediting legislation for crude oil transportation systems, i.e. pipelines. That should sound familiar. The NGPA, they were looking at price controls. Now this is looking at natural gas closer. Deregulation of certain gas. We already talked about that in the billing as far as being able to purchase gas from one producer and having your local distributor, you pay a certain price to the local person for the distribution. A more specific incremental pricing structure for natural gas, and they also gave the federal government an emergency authority over the distribution and supply of natural gas. Finally, the ETA, residential insulation and conservation tax credits, residential solar tax credits. Now you have to remember that this was 1978. We didn't have, or not in wide use, photovoltaics. The solar back in the mid-80s was running water through a darkened background and actually collecting heat from radiant. So this had nothing to do with converting solar to electricity in the mid-80s. Number 3, exemption of gasohol from excise tax. The gas guzzler tax, so they were taxing or adding a tax on certain vehicles, SUVs, Hummers, those type of things that used excessive amounts of gas. There was a geothermal energy and geopressurized natural gas tax provision, minimal tax exclusion for intangible drilling costs, business energy tax credits, denial of tax benefits for new oil and gas-fired boilers. So these were the major provisions that were actually set up in the original National Energy Act of 1978. It's important to realize that here in the 2010s, we're still utilizing a lot of those same features that were put in, 30 some odd years ago. Now, as far as the other major energy policy acts, the one in 1992 and 2005, they included 27 titles. They really expanded the original act of 1978. There were huge areas increasing, looking at alternative fuels. They started looking again at greenhouse gases more closely, this whole climate change issue, and they were constantly trying to find money or other incentives to get people to go the direction of alternate fuels. This ends Lecture 4B. When you're ready, you can proceed to Week 4, Lecture 4C. Thank you.